is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
On Sunday, the 17th of May, 2015, hundreds of bikers were attending a meeting at the Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas. Most of the bikers in attendance were from two rival gangs, the Cossacks and the Banditos. They'd come together for a common cause, a routine meeting between the gangs to discuss bikers' rights in a neutral space. The Cossacks had arrived early, wanting to present a strong front to the Banditos. By the time the rival gang arrived, they were greeted by the sight of the Cossacks sitting in the restaurant's patio area, waiting for them. Peace between the two groups did not last long. It began as an argument over parking, which grew more and more heated as Bandito bikers supposedly used bikes to deliberately run over a Cossack's foot. Within minutes, several of the members had drawn their weapons, and multiple shots were fired. Reginald Weathers, a member of the Banditos, might have been the first person to be shot, but because he had been punched by a Cossack shortly before the shot was fired, he was bent over and never saw who was holding the gun. CCTV footage of the shooting was later leaked online, showing the other customers and waitstaff running from the gunfire, while hundreds of bikers drew their weapons. Richard Luther, a member of the Cossack gang at the time, talked about the chaos later. Quote, "I curled up in the fetal position with 3 other people." He said, "I looked up and saw another biker, Richie, hit the ground, saw him bleeding from the head, started seeing people dying and falling all around me. We decided we needed to move, so we crawled military style on our stomachs up the patio stairs, through the patio, and into the restaurant until the police came. Really, at that point, I didn't know who was shooting." The local police had been aware of the meeting, and they were waiting nearby in case a fight broke out between the two gangs. Within minutes of the first shot being fired, police were on the scene. Although most of the forensic evidence in the shooting has not been released to the public, allegedly, several of the bikers shot that day were shot with a .223 caliber rifle, the firearm used by the Waco police. According to the police who responded that day, the force that they used was necessary to quickly control the scene and prevent more people from losing their lives. After only a few minutes of shooting, 9 people had already sustained fatal injuries, and many more were seriously hurt. The officers detained so many bikers that the local police station was too small for processing the suspects. All 177 bikers were driven to Waco's convention center and accused of the same crime, engaging in organized criminal activity. That was a serious charge, with the potential for a life sentence if they were convicted. Their bonds were set at $1 million each, a fee that most of the suspects could not afford. The justice of the peace who set the bonds justified the high fee, saying, "I think it's important to send a message." The Twin Peaks restaurant where the shooting had taken place was criticized for allowing such a large group of bikers to meet there, and shortly after, the chain announced that the Waco restaurant's franchise was being canceled. They gave the reason that the restaurant's management had ignored police warnings about the bikers and that they'd failed to uphold security standards designed to keep everyone in the restaurant safe. In the shooting's aftermath, the police discovered what they believed was overwhelming evidence that most of the bikers had been prepared for violence that day. They might not have known how the fight would start, but they made sure that they would be able to defend themselves when it happened. At the scene, more than 200 weapons were recovered: firearms, brass knuckles, knives, baseball bats, and chains. While waiting in jail for their bonds to be lowered, the bikers were unable to support their families. After they got out, many of them lost the jobs that they previously held before going in, or watched their marriage crumble. Quote, "When I got out of jail," Cossack biker Richard Luther said, "I called the owner of the roofing company that I worked for. He said, 'Can't have gang members working for me.' I couldn't do anything. Nobody wanted us around." Out of all 117 suspects, only one of them ended up needing to appear in court, Jake Carrizal, who was a chapter president for the Bandidos. It was an emotional trial. One of the officers who had responded to the scene began to cry uncontrollably on the stand as he relived memories of the crime scene, saying, "It wasn't supposed to go like that. It just looked like a horror movie." After 6 weeks, the jury was not able to agree on a verdict, and in November 2017, Jake Carrizal's trial was ruled as a mistrial. One of the key issues with actually convicting any of the suspects was the level of chaos that had unfolded during the shooting. Even the people who were witnesses that day said they had no idea how it started. One moment, things were relatively calm, and the next moment, the restaurant was a scene of mass murder. Since very shortly after the shooting, the police's response has been controversial. Many of the bikers argued that the police officers just arrested anyone who was at the scene, including people who had not drawn a weapon and were simply trying to flee from the shooters. The bikers believed that the police created an unfair narrative, placing all of the gang members as being murderous criminals who had intended on doing harm that day. As a result of the Waco shootout, more than 100 lawsuits were brought forth against Waco law enforcement. Of the bikers who chose to file a civil rights lawsuit was Diego Obledo, one of the men who insisted that he had not contributed to the violence. Allegedly, Diego didn't even have a weapon with him that day, but he was arrested still for engaging in organized criminal activity. In fact, according to the lawsuit, Diego had not been a member of either of the main gangs involved in the shooting. He was a member of the Christian Motorcycle Association. When he was arrested, he had been carrying a small Bible in the pocket of his vest. When the new McLennan County District Attorney, Barry Johnson, took office in 2019, he made an announcement. Out of the 177 men arrested, 155 had been indicted. He decided to drop the charges against the remaining 24 suspects because, in his opinion, it was useless to push it any further. Carrizal's trial had racked up around $1.5 million in legal costs, and ultimately, it had been pointless. Attorney Johnson was open to the possibility of charging some of the bikers for murder if they uncovered any new evidence, but at the moment, he didn't think the prosecution had a chance of winning. He thought that earlier in the case, there might have been opportunities to convict some of the bikers of other charges, like unlawful weapon possession, attempted murder, and assault. But now, the statute of limitations on some of those crimes has expired. For many of the bikers who had been arrested during the shootout, the news was a relief. Quote, "For us that are living, it is vindication. It's like the weight of the world has been lifted off our shoulders," said Richard Luther, who had already begun the process of suing Waco law enforcement. According to Richard, being arrested in the shootout had cost him more than just his time. He'd paid more than $40,000 in legal fees and therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. Clint Broden, who represented several of the bikers in their lawsuits, agreed that the real perpetrators could have been prosecuted if the investigation had been more thorough. "In the United States," he said, "we investigate first, and then we charge. We don't charge first and then investigate." This was done completely ass backwards. If the original district attorney, Abel Reyna, just charged those who were criminally responsible, I think we would have had some prosecutions and likely convictions. But because he made such a mess of it, this is the end result. The Waco Tribune-Herald described the shootout as leading to a 4-year prosecutorial fiasco that resulted in 0 convictions. Everyone who was there that day has a slightly different story of what happened, and 8 years later, the identity of the person who fired the first shot is still unknown. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're new to 10-Minute Murder, I'm super pumped that you are here. You decided to listen to this podcast today. Hope you continue to do that. And to make it easier on you, hit the subscribe button. That will more easily let you catch up on all the back episodes. When you open the app, you don't have to go searching for 10-Minute Murder. What was that podcast? I don't remember what was that podcast I was listening to yesterday with the just short episodes, and the host was like super cool, like really cool, like above average cool. You don't have to remember 10-minute murder every time. It's going to be there every time you open the app if you subscribe. Also, you can keep up with what's going on with the podcast on social media and see the pictures of what we talk about here. So links in the description of this episode, or you can just go to any social media app that you want to follow the show and type in 10-minute murder, and there it's going to be. If you like this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, Audible, any place that's possible. And don't forget, the whole month of October, share this podcast, take a quick screenshot of it, send it to me, direct message or email, and randomly, many of you this month are going to win gift cards to Target. Quick listener email question before we go. Joe, in person, are you a talker or are you quiet? That's from Stacy in Hanover. And Stacy, I can tell you that I'm both. There are times, if I know you really well, I'll talk. I'll talk a lot. But also, if I know you really well, I might not say very much at all. It's because I don't just talk for no reason. I'm weird like that. If I don't have anything to say, I don't just start talking and just to fill the silence. I'm cool with silence. I'm cool with sitting there not saying anything, and I don't think anything about it. I don't think, well, this is awkward. It's just silence. I'm good with it. And I'm also good with you not knowing what I'm thinking all the time. I don't feel like I need to express what's on my brain all the time because there's chaos in there. In my brain, sometimes there's just pure chaos. So I don't always like to verbalize that. And the people that do, I mean, that's your thing. That's cool. Do what you want to do, but that's not what I do. So it's a yes and no question, but by default, if I don't really know you that well, I'm pretty quiet. All right, that's going to do it. That is your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.